We'll go ahead and get started. As I just mentioned, this is the first time that we're having our lecture series back in person since February of 2020. So thank you so much for coming and being here. It really means a lot. It's so great to have you back in the museum and to see people's, well, behind your masks, see your faces again. My name is Jill McCleary. I'm the interim director here at the University of Arizona Museum of Art. And again, just thank you for joining us. I do want to start with a land acknowledgement. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Atum and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. In terms of a few housekeeping items tonight, I do want to thank you all in advance for helping us to provide a welcoming, respectful, and safe environment for every person in the room. As we can't fully socially distance, we are requiring masks for all attendees. I do also have a few thanks that I want to make sure that I say right at the beginning. First and foremost, thanks to Malia Jensen for traveling today all the way here to Tucson to be with us for this exciting talk. And also for tomorrow, spending time with U of A students here on campus that are going to have the opportunity to learn from you, which is really an incredible opportunity. Also, big thanks to the museum's Leadership Council, our wonderful staff, students, and volunteers, and to Arizona Arts Life staff who are here helping us record this event for everybody who did not feel comfortable joining us tonight. Many thanks as well to our museum members who support the museum on a yearly basis. Membership is a fantastic way to stay connected to the museum, and they receive great perks such as free admission, members-only talks, and invitations to exclusive events. Speaking of great events, we've got some more happening this month. Next week, we're going to be doing a trip to Tucson Village Farm. If you remember, you get a great discount on that. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you'd like to learn more about it, you can go to our website to learn about that and our other events coming up. So I'm now going to turn it over to our curator of exhibitions, Olivia Miller, to introduce our guest.
Thank you all so much for being here. I echo all of Jill's sentiments, how exciting it is to have an event like this in person, to have a real artist in the flesh here at the museum is thrilling, particularly in relation to this exhibition that we've been working on for more than 3 years. It had to be postponed due to the pandemic, so it makes it all the more special that we're finally able to be here. There's been so much anticipation. So I'm really excited to have Malia Jensen here with us tonight. 2 of her works are included in the current exhibition that we have, The Art of Food, from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his family foundation. So her works are located downstairs. One of them is called Butterscape. And this is a work that, again, is in the downstairs gallery. And when you look at it, it seems as if it's, a relatively ordinary object, right? It's a stick of butter. It's sitting on a plate. It's been sculpted. It's slightly mushed on the top. But I was immediately drawn to this work. And I have to tell you that I was working with a very, very large collection, 19,000 objects in the collections of Jordan Schnitzer, more than 600 of which had to deal with the subject of food. So it was really difficult to narrow it down. But I immediately wanted Butterscape in the show. And partly because when I looked at it, I was so amused by it. It just seemed like such an ironic piece because I'm very drawn to objects that seem to have sort of an ordinary presentation to them at first, but once you realize the interpretive possibilities, it gets really exciting. And with Butterscape in particular, the title I found to be so provocative, and I found to really bring up questions about humans and nature. And in this same sort of topic of humans and nature, I also found in the Salt Lick. So that work is also downstairs in the gallery. It's a sculpture of a breast sculpted out of salt. And so again, it creates this human connection with this natural world. And what I find really crucial about these questions is really, how do we define nature? How do we define the boundaries of nature? You know, where does it start? Where does it end? Why is it that we oftentimes think of humans as separate from nature, that it's something over there? And that's where Butterscape, I found it so interesting, because we often think of the word landscape when we hear that word scape. And landscape is often this vista, something over there, and we're here, and we're looking at it. And so these questions of nature really connected back to food. You know, when we think about food cycles, food chains, you know, how our eating choices affect the natural world, and so on and so forth. And so I'm really excited to hear Malia's talk, because you're going to get to hear the evolution of that Salt Lick and how it expanded into this much larger project that really examines nature and how we define it. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Malia Jensen. So Malia is a Portland-based artist known primarily for her work in sculpture and video. She has been an artist in residence at the Headland Center for the Arts, UCross Foundation, Robert Rauschenberg Foundation, Yucca Valley Materials Lab, and the Portland Garment Factory. She is currently a 2021 artist in residence with Glean, reclaiming materials from Portland's Metro Waste Transfer Station. Jensen has been a visiting artist at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, Whitman College, and Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and has mentored students at Oregon College of Arts and Crafts and Pacific Northwest College of Art. Jensen's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and can be found in many public and private collections. Near a Nature Project, which we'll hear more about today, I am assuming, received support from the Creative Heights initiative of the Oregon Community Foundation, and engaged multiple locations across the state. Worth Your Salt was screened online in 2020 during a virtual residency with the Portland Art Museum, and was recently added to that museum's permanent collection. Jensen is represented by Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland and the Kristen Tierney Gallery in New York City. So please join me in welcoming Malia Jensen.
This is when I get to test my sound. Thank you, Olivia. How's that? Am I sound good? You can hear me? I'm mic'd. I have these invisible mics attached to my person. And if it's okay with all of you, I'm going to take my mask off and talk that way. And I am sufficiently nervous now after that fine introduction. And I really appreciate you all coming. Nervous, not least of which is because I gave this talk this really elaborate title, which I feel like I must have come up with at 2 a.m. and decided that was a good idea. So I'm going to be playing verbal pickup sticks with synaptic connections and energetic relationships. I'm going to start by running in the background 4 2-minute clips of the video, Worth Your Salt, which was the culmination of the Nearer Nature project. And I think it has some sound. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but if we've also made available the full 6-hour video if anyone wants to log in and watch it. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what that project culminated in as I go backwards and talk about how it came into being. And I'll probably click through these a little bit if they start to feel tedious, if you're expecting a faster talk. So beginning with a proposal that I had been thinking about in 2018, as a country feeling the rips and divisions escalating, I really wanted to create a project or to do something as an artist that felt like it was bringing things together, or that it had I almost thought of it like as a desperate measure of an attempt at magic. Like, what can you do to pull the energy back and hold space for something different that's not built on the fear and divisiveness, which was ripping us apart and still is. So Nearer Nature project, originally when I was writing the proposal, I had 4 projects conceived, and Worth Your Salt was the first one I started, and it quickly became the consuming project. And so for this piece, I carved 6 salt licks into parts of a body. This is a Brancusi referenced head. If it's not obvious in this picture, it will be in a detail. And there's a head, 2 hands, a breast, and a dozen donuts representing the stomach, and a foot. And I placed them across the state of Oregon in the shape of a reclining body, abstractly. So if you see it from a distance, or if you envision it conceptually, it creates the feeling of a body. This one, I hope the sound, we're not hearing the sound on this, which is okay, but it is kind of a dramatically wonderful element to this piece when you hear this flock of band-tailed pigeons on the Oregon coast. Chelsea's working on it. Let's see if it comes up. Again, it's okay. Okay, imagine you've seen those little pigeons, those wind-up pigeons in like gift stores or Chinatown, and they go. So if everybody like did that, it pretty much sounds like that. Thank you for humoring me. So when you're watching the video, and I sometimes use the video, I just have it on sometimes on a monitor in my studio when I'm working, and it's a really interesting phenomena when you start to know exactly what's happening when you hear certain sounds, and you kind of acculturate in your mind to the audio that you're not even seeing the visual of, and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what landscape that's in. So one of the things about the audio of this piece, and if you are able, we've made it available for the next week on my Vimeo if you want the password from Olivia, to just put it on in your house someplace and go about your day and see if it works any magic on you. But after I had set the camera at this location, which just sort of felt like a good place to have a camera, it was on the end of a root slab, which I'll show later. And this is starting in on the synaptic connections. The mineral function of salt and other minerals in our bodies and in all animals' bodies is part like why these birds are here in this spot, because they return, as it turns out, annually to this particular patch of mud for a mineral deposit that they require in their diets. So there's a certain time of year when they come back and are here at the Oregon coast. This one, and actually there's an interesting connection that Olivia wasn't aware of, but Chris Anteman, who's the artist who's done that gorgeous Baroque porcelain assemblage of luscious humans in a sort of English, what is even the mode that you would call them in the fruit? This is on the backside. She and her husband Jacob have land in far eastern Oregon, and her studio is there outside of Joseph. And this is on the back half of their 40 acres of land, because one of the things that I was looking for when I was out scouting to place the salt licks was places that weren't going to have necessarily a lot of hunting, or someplace that I knew, so there was a balance of finding public land or private land where I could trust that it wasn't going to disrupt, or also, it's obviously a salt lick, so it becomes a bait situation if you're a hunter. And I wasn't aiming to do any favors, although I definitely feel like as environmentalists working with hunters. Like I'm not anti-hunting, and this project was in part about bridging the gaps between an urban art-based project and taking the project that I had conceived out into the rural parts of the state that didn't often get as engaged in, say, the white box gallery setting that a lot of artists, and myself included, have been more acculturated to or familiar with. So when I conceived of Worth Your Salt as a project that was umbrellaed under Near Nature, I was trying to get myself out of the studio and into a place and sort of to force my hand into a place where I had to, I guess, take myself out of my comfort zone and work in communities that weren't necessarily where I had connections already, even though this piece, obviously, I did end up putting on. So I didn't know them at the time, but I was like, here's how I'm working on this. Is there a place? And so at the same time as I was, here's the head in progress in the studio. So at the same time as I was starting to place the salt across the state, I began the series of salt carvings, and if I'd have a few done, I'd load them up in my car and go off and see who and where I could find. So it was a bit of just finding my way towards different spaces. And one of the things that I think that I was trying to pull off with what I'm calling the maybe gently working down boundaries that we think are up that might not actually exist, as just a simple act of walking into a space where you might feel vulnerable or intimidated with your arms at your sides and open and vulnerable, and saying like, I'm doing this funny project and I'm looking for a space, and would you be interested in this? Or maybe could I put this in your grocery store? Instead of not walking in, sort of with one's arms folded or feeling suspicious. So at the same time as I was placing the works in the landscape with the cameras, so each piece would have 3 cameras in the vicinity, not necessarily focused on the piece, but near it. I was also finding relationships with people nearby so that I could, at some point when I had edited the bulk of the footage, that I could bring the video back to those communities and show it there. So it's interesting trying to talk about this project, and I had made notes for this talk, and I realized it's such a non-linear project by design that my hope for the project was to create a complicated web. So I might be off on a thread on occasion and trying to sort of return back to the linear nature of me standing in front of you giving a talk about it. But I also would like to insert that we put a piece of paper and pencils on your chairs because I also love questions. And if you have a question, or if you think that there's something that I missed, I would love it if you were inclined to write it down and give it to Olivia, and we could touch on it at the end. So because I had thought I was going to talk about this later, and I will show slides of it later, but ultimately, when I had a 5-hour edit of the piece done, I showed it at a high school in the vicinity of Nehalem. It was at a grocery store in Chi Valley. It was at OHSU molecular biology department. It was at 12 places, like a mental health clinic in Eastern Oregon, a chocolate shop. So I was going to all of these places and saying, can I install a monitor in the grocery store or in your bar? And I'll touch on that later, but that was, so while I was out in these landscapes, I was also trying to just meet people and have kind of random experiences, which sometimes involve just doing something that looked awkward in the feed store in Redmond. You know, like you stand there holding a big salt rock long enough, someone says, can I help you? And you're like, well, let me tell you why, or maybe you can, you know. So this one, this breast, carved breast, which is part of, I had started making the breasts, as Olivia said, in 2010. I did a series of carved salt breasts while I was living in New York, very far away from animal interaction and nature. And there was a whole other layer to that carving process. When you see the one downstairs, envision me in artist garret in New York, a big concrete, beautiful windowed studio with my safety glasses on and mallets and chisels, carving a breast with like vintage Playboy magazines as like reference material. And it was like this funny, it felt like a performance for no one. Like it was the artist in the garret kind of cliche, including spending an inordinate amount of time sculpting a woman's breast, which is, as anyone who's leafed through old art history books knows, that's a thing. This are the donuts representing the stomach, and that was maybe a bit of humor on my part, as much as I was having a hard time finding humor when I was making this project in 2019 because it was so intense and dark. It's not that far away from my oeuvre. So I started to say the breast piece was along the White River in Tye Valley, Oregon, which is a little fly fishing spot. And one of the times when I was there, actually relocating it upriver, for a reason I won't go into, but it's funny. I ended up meeting this group of fly fishermen who ended up being OHSU scientists on like a team building retreat. So it was the president of OHSU, the president of the Night Cancer Research Institute, the head of molecular biology. So all of these people who were kind of thrust together, I assume, by their management, saying like, you guys need to like talk. You guys need to like work some things out between your apartment. Why don't you rent this log cabin for 2 nights and get to know each other or something? So they're kind of, you know, so they found me next to the river, moving the salt around with driving on my spare because I'd had a flat on the way, hungry, it was getting dark, and they're like, what are you doing? And do you eat steak? Do you drink whiskey? Why don't you come for dinner? So I ended up going and having dinner and staying at their cabin with them. And it was sort of a peculiar moment because I was on this gravel road and I wouldn't mind driving on my spare tire, except that it was a bit of off-roading. And I thought, well, if I don't say yes, if I don't go join this very group of people who I would want to meet, I would be obviously betraying the project. Like that was what I wanted to do with the project, was have unexpected conversations with people at a level that you don't necessarily, you don't just have a conversation. So we sat at the table and talked about the relationship and why is it that like arts and sciences, that was on so many universities, that was like in the concrete. That was like in the brickwork, the arts and sciences. Like why has that been so uncoupled? And why not bring that back together? And what could we do if those things were more entwined? So it was a great ranging conversation, and I'm still in communication with Dr. Susan Hayflick, who I actually called her. I said, hey, okay, I've made up this title just so that I can like have a good reason to talk to you about like salt in the body. So confirm this. This is my intuition. She's like, yeah, you're fine. Just go riff on that. the sort of neurotransmitter of salt in the body, as I conceived of this project, has a mirroring structure with the project itself, in that it's the sort of relationship building between object and idea, and just putting something out in a way that might make draw relationships to it. So this is the foot in my studio being carved by me, and from another angle. And with the study of my own foot, which I made in clay so that I could carve that foot, because it was very hard to keep my foot on the table and carve it at the same time. I did a pretty good job, but yeah. This is a representation that we published as a card when the project was happening, viewable in all of the different places. I should have included the back of it, which included all the locations where it was. So this is you can see this sort of abstracted body across the state, making a fairly heavy-handed metaphor, but worthy. The other thing about the project was simply getting deeper in touch with the incredible beauty of the state of Oregon, which I've spent most of my life on. And manually, so once a month, so I had 18 cameras across the state in 6 different locations, and about once a month I would go check all of the camera traps. So about every weekend for the summer, I was driving to one location or another to swap out the SD cards, put them in, and download that footage. So this is in sort of north central Oregon, and this was back at the next to the river in Ty Valley. And it's some of these pictures where this one was out my car window on the phone. Like, it's just incredible. And I know your state, like Arizona, I'm looking forward to spending some time here this week. But it's something to be not forced, but to allow oneself to be in the position of really savoring something over and over, the repetition of going out to the same places, the same time, and watching the nuances and the seasons change in these subtle ways. So I guess Olivia was sort of alluding to that being, although this is very altered nature, obviously, the wheat fields. But I never did not think about the history of this land as I was driving over these roads in it. And even hearing, I don't know, we've gotten used to land acknowledgements in a way, but honestly, I nearly cry when I hear them, when you really think about like where we are and where Arizona is and where Oregon is and how that history of that land and the depth of experience, the depth of human and animal experience that has happened on this land, it's just very moving. And I'd hoped to bring some of that in the duration of the project, because if you sit for 6 hours and watch this video, you kind of have to, you don't have to watch you don't have to pay attention all the time, but it will creep into your psyche in a way that I feel might alter something. I included these because I think they're funny. This was part of my process. And once I checked the cameras for the first time, because you can't really see what you're capturing exactly, so there's a little window of the screen on them, but I made notes of what I wanted to alter. So, the donuts were crooked. I'll take that branch out. I'll trim that branch, which would have been very irritating to see. So I made these little sketches as reference maps, and I grabbed this screen save of a bobcat marking the donuts as its own territory. So a little, yeah. So this is in near Sisters, Oregon. And then I included a few frames of the selfies, I guess, the camera grabs of when I'm checking the footage. I have, dozens of moments when I'm approaching the cameras to check the frame, to check the SD cards, and of course I'm pictured in it. So these became a sort of funny running series. And I also would use a different hat to kind of slate my camera so I could tell like which footage, which hat was I wearing in which date. So this one, and I had found this hat at the bottom of a dry lake bed in Ashland. And it came in handy. I would have to say, wear the American flag hat if I was driving through certain places. And I like it, though. I like that hat. Checking the hand. And this is the Roots Lab on the Nehalem estuary that I had the cameras set on. Should I show that? That was where the pigeons were, where the band-tailed pigeons were. And this is estuary land that is currently stewarded by the Lower Nehalem Community Trust. So I had found some friends of a friend. I'm like, oh, you should talk to these folks. So this is on land trust land on the Oregon coast. So it's a no hunting sanctuary, essentially. It's in proximity to hunting land. So you definitely, I would see birders with their guns walking by early in the morning. Sometimes. I didn't have none of my cameras were disturbed or passled at all. By a few elk, but not by any humans. There was a whole bunch. The next frame is sort of like the next phase of the process. But the sort of, during this time of gathering the footage, the amount of material that I was bringing in necessitated a really complicated filing system. The video is comprised of over 30,000 30-second video clips, so captured off of 18 cameras, each one like once or twice, or maybe once every 2 months, So the whole thing, when I was thinking about like, how am I going to edit this together? I likened it to, first I'm braiding the footage together, essentially making, like, we created, so I guess I'll go to the next frame because this is I also wanted the project to involve as many people as I could. Not necessarily because it made my life easier, but because I wanted to recomplicate everything. So my main editor, Ben Mercer, you see the back of his head there, and a group of people who I found, or they found me. I had put some notices up at PSU and PNCA, like video editing project. So we had a great small group of 6 of us, and each of them got a section. So one person would take the footage from the coast. Another would take the footage from Ashland. So, and then and Ben and I, working with Ben, I designed a grid template, which is what you saw, so that each, what you're seeing in the grid, which also very importantly echoes surveillance, because this is about, in a sense, it's also about surveillance. So it echoes the workings, the mechanics of surveillance, but it also keeps the image literally moving so that you're seeing 4 simultaneous clips at the same time. And I think that helps you trust that you're not being trapped. Like, in a sense, if you're watching a video and you're like, okay, I get it. I see where this is going. I'm done. So the difference to me was, I feel like it allowed a space for you to become mesmerized with the sort of comforting repetition of being able to know that you're going to see this frame, that's always moving. And there's always something to see, and there's always something that's changing, and the relationships between the things that are in the different frames are interesting. There'll be like a coyote in one frame and a bird in the other frame, or daylight in one and night footage in the other three, and there's different. And one of the comments that I had from young people most often was that they really enjoyed, like their favorite parts were when there were different animals in different quadrants. And I thought that was a really, it seemed to me to kind of testament to a desire to see a sort of harmony, or that there was something almost surprising that, like, oh, wait a minute, like a bobcat just went that way and a deer just went that way and they're not fighting? Like that there's something about watching and seeing the natural world just be itself and be in its own harmony that certainly was consoling to me. This is another angle in my studio, and my project manager, Tiff Harker, in the green, she kept me on my toes, sort of accountable to myself. And I'm still in touch with Lily, this woman in the blonde. She's just finished a film that is about experiences in Portland of mental health and houseless population. So they're all doing really cool things, and getting to know this group of younger people was a part of what kept me, why I added that piece to the project. And then Ben and I worked for some very long hours to assemble the braid into a French braid. So all the little pieces coming together in a way that we made a system where the footage kind of cycles around keeping the body in order, cycles around the state 3 times and creates, ultimately, you see the seasonal changes. As you see the head was the piece that was in the video the longest because it was closest to Portland, and it was just up off in the Tualatin Mountains behind Skyline Tavern, if any of you know Portland, on some private land there. And being the closest, I could check the footage the most often. So the head, through the course of the project, starts with this Brancusi reference and goes down to a little nub. And the elk herd there is vigorous and healthy. And this was a little bit of like late spring, shedding their winter coat and growing antlers, which will, by the end of this project, by the end of this year, those two are spikes. But you see the antlers being the fastest growing bone calcium output of anything. Like, it's incredible to think that antlers are dropped every year and regrown, which is, I don't know, I'm still incredulous. The infrared footage at dusk had a particularly magical look because you can still see the light of day. And I loved watching certain of the elk, certain of the cows. I would see they would have either a specific kind of personality, like you kind of get to know them after a while, and she's just pushing probably her yearling from the previous year away. And then later in the fall, so an arc of the seasonal changes. And the elk are kind of up higher in the hills at this point. Oh, they're just still there. A still from the Nehalem estuary camera. The pigeons. This is the hand that was in Ashland, and it was kind of the tallest thing in this field. And a good friend of mine who I had met because of this project was helping me install down there, and he's also a hunter. So had these terrific maps where he could tell where it was okay, like this is a public place, you could put it here, it's legal. But he set this piece for me, and it's in this pretty open field, and so it kind of became a bit of a lookout for various animals would stand up on it, and I believe that is just a squirrel, but it looks significant. I love squirrels. The turkeys in Thai Valley are were also some favorite characters. And this camera, like you can see the river, there's a little bit of the river in the corner, and seasonally it sort of comes in and out of focus. Like sometimes you don't see that it's there because of the leaves, and then sometimes in the winter it's really pronounced. This is a nearby camera in that same location, obviously, with a beautiful bobcat trotting through. And this one captures a bit of this unexpected action. I didn't know, it was always an interesting process to try and locate where I was going to be setting the cameras, because you kind of feel like for different, like there's a lot of things to take into consideration which way the arc of the sun is, because you don't want it flaring into your camera. But I just really like this rock, and so I set this camera facing it, and as it turned out, the animals also really like the rock. And there's a series of squirrels that jump on it and sit and just look. But the turkeys actually used it as essentially like a diving board, or they would line up in front of it and one at a time launch themselves off of the rock to fly across the river. So there's this very funny, and it's just sort of like, I don't know, it makes me laugh every time. And I wonder, I don't know, you have to wonder, I mean, I guess I wonder at the humor of animals. Like, do they know they're funny? Like, especially turkeys? Deer, I don't think are funny. I think they're very earnest. This is a nice shot of a deer and a very healthy, cute cinnamon bear, which is actually is a brown bear, but he is a cinnamon-hued bear, so cinnamon bear, not just the Grateful Dead. I was really excited to get a story in the Sisters Nugget, written by, now I'm going to go draw a complete blank. T. Lee Brown, who lives in the Sisters area and is an editorial writer for the Nugget and did a piece on this project. And I think she smartly deployed my American flag hat, which I have no problem with. Salty artwork suggests beauty and connection. And it really was like, I feel like the timing of the piece, had we not had this fricking pandemic, like, what would be different? Where would we be if that hadn't, have we grown from that, or have we contracted? I don't know yet. But I'm hoping to go back out into the parts of the state that I spent time in and got to love, as we are able to be in the world differently again. And I would love to go back to the feed store in Sisters that agreed to put the video above their horse and blanket display for 3 months. They had a guest book. People would say, like, what's that? And they'd say, it's an artwork. and people would say, okay. So Here's the piece, Ryan Kitson, my friend who helped me with the location initially, who was teaching at SOU at Southern Oregon University. He installed it inside the sculpture department so you could see it from outside the windows at night. This is in the Riverside Inn in Maupin. And Leah, the restaurant bar owner, told me that this couple, and luckily they were there. She had already told me about them. She said, oh, you have some regulars. Like there's particularly one couple who come 3 or 4 days a week for lunch. And they were there when I was there to try and take some pictures. And they said, oh yeah, we come early or late so that we can be sure and get that table right in front of it. I was like, this is pretty much why I did the project. And this kid who's watching it inside the Thai Valley General Store, which is a 100-year-old grocery store. It's one of the only sort of 2 businesses in this tiny community of Thai Valley. And it is one of my favorite places. This store is just magically odd and deep. As you can see, it's found its perfect location mixed in with photographs taken by other longtime customers of folks in the community. And this is the outside. This is it in the Nehalem High School, it's called Neocani High School. And I had it in the library there, and the students, I went and did had a conversation with them about obviously, like, these are kids who live at the coast, so their proximity to the nature that I was feeling removed from, it's like their backyard. So, and I had people at the feed store too saying, like, this one kid who was like, well, he's like, I hope you don't care that I'm just counting the spikes. Like, I'm like, I don't care. Like, he's just trying to figure out how it was going to enhance his hunting. It's like, that's great. Go, we're on the same side of keeping the natural world a viable going concern. So it was a great conversation with the kids. I had it in a little small space behind the stage in this wonderfully orange room at the Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School in Portland. I don't know how long it actually was installed there because, as it turned out, it was distracting, as you can imagine. This is the piece that I installed at OHSU outside of the molecular biology offices. So, and they actually, unlike a lot of the locations which had sound concerns, they left the sound on. So you would be in the halls of this research facility, medical, hospital, institution, hearing a cacophony of howling coyotes, or hearing the bird wings flapping. And it was there, they kept it they had it up for 3 or maybe 4 months. They didn't really want it to go away. And this monitor, this one existed. Most of the other ones I installed, but this one existed, and it was formerly their information board. It would say such and such date or this, or here's a change or this. And they were like, nah, take it, go ahead. We have other ways of finding that information. So that was a very satisfying location to have it installed. This is I originally didn't intend, or I hadn't planned on casting the pieces once they were used. But the hand, when it was still installed, when I came upon it for a camera check in Nehalem, you might remember in the beginning, it had these kind of fat, chubby fingers and this piece of fruit that it was offering up. So months later, 5 months later, it looks like this, and it has this sort of haunting, Hansel and Gretel, here's an offering for you, like, which I thought like it brought to me the perfect analogy of, of trying to, like, I made this for you. The human hubris of trying to, or even supposing that we can help nature, or that we have something to offer it, like the wild natural world. So this was about like that sort of push-pull of the dubious offering of human intervention into the natural world. And I just thought it was so beautiful, it kind of took me aback. So I checked with an acquaintance, Michael Endo, who used to work at Bullseye Glass and now lives in Yucca Valley and has a glass shop there with a woman named Heidi Schwegler. It's called Yucca Valley Materials Lab. And she started a residency program after leaving PNCA and moving, as I know other people seem to sort of migrate towards the Southwest. So I took the salt pieces. I called him and said, hey, would it be possible to cast these in glass? And he happened to be in town and came over for a studio visit and said, yeah, let's do it. And that was January of 2020. So at the very last moment possible, I got to go to Joshua, to Yucca Valley, and cast this series, or begin the process of casting them in glass. So this is the original salt one, sort of dirtied up by the process of taking a mold from it, and the wax that is used. Essentially, it's very similar to the process of bronze casting. So this is now the glass piece with, and I did a sort of ink patina on the surface of it to accentuate the effects of time and weather and the animals. And a lot of tooling, like making the glass pieces is very involved. I could have shown quite a lot of images of the chaos of what they look like when they come out of the investment, which you have to chip off and then clean and sprue, take the sprues off and chase the seams. And so Michael he started that work and then shipped them back to me, and I finished the chasing and that work in my Portland studio. And then in 2020, it was an interesting, during this, bringing this project to fruition, to completion, as during a pandemic, during the time of isolation, when we were all like, it's really, truly incredible to see so many real humans in one room for an artist talk and a conversation in a museum right now. And this whole past year, like I had two shows of this work, which were, no one could come. so it was like this, it almost felt like this doubling of this sort of isolation. I titled this show Ermocene, after the E.O. Wilson's term, like there's the Anthropocene, the theory, which is maybe just a fact of this epoch being dominated by human and affected most by human actions. The Ermocene was E.O. Wilson's word for the age of loneliness. So it is based in the speed with which species are disappearing. And if we don't, in his optimistic and hopeful vision, set aside half the planet to preserve the species, we, they will all disappear, or we will lose X amount. I don't have those figures. But so it was kind of a wild experience to be having spent all of this time sort of alone, busy, alone in the woods, doing this project and doing this editing, and then bring this piece into these sort of intensely cool gallery urban spaces. I felt incredibly blessed to be able to have these two shows during that time, and I was really thrilled with how they came out. And the videos that you see on so I had the 3 different they were staggered so that you saw 12 different frames circling. So it had a kind of cacophonous intensity when you were in the room, in a quiet cacophony, if that's possible. So some gallery shots. This is at Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland. And then early in this year, 2021, in February, I had a show. I wasn't even able to make it to this show. I didn't even go. We installed over Zoom. So this is at Chris and Tierney Gallery in New York. And that was also an interesting experience to set it in a city, in a big city. Not that Portland isn't a city. So this is the little nub of the head, what remains. This is a detail of the glass hand with that little isthmus of salt that's still connected to the thumb and the plum. And that sort of felt like, had I waited, 2 days, maybe that would have been gone. Like it was one of those things when you kind of come upon something, you're like, it felt uncanny. The breast, which is sort of as you would be maybe looking down on your own. And the foot, and you could see on the bottom, it was kind of a favorite place for the elk to lick. There was on the back of the heel, there's a lot of wear, and on the arch of the foot. And the next slide is going to seem like kind of a non sequitur. But I keep this postcard on my bulletin board. And I've thought about this. I think this is actually not Broadway. This is Fifth Avenue. And it's ramrod straight. But if for those of you who spent any time at all in New York, like that kind of frustrating diagonal of Broadway that sort of imposes itself on the grid of the city. And I wonder if we don't often think about like why that was there, why that was like that. I don't know, maybe you do. But it was the original animal migratory path up and down the island. So when you look at this and you think like, oh, that's like a fact. It's like a physical fact, like just concretely expressed in this. And like I said, this Fifth Avenue, which is an interesting counterpoint because it's so straight. And then you think about Broadway, and when you look at it, and the next map I have is a really early map of New York City, and you kind of can see how Broadway sort of meanders up towards I don't even know what the name of that river that's coming into the East River is, but if you think about like the history of that, like that animals, the overlay going back of animals wearing this, indigenous people, trappers, traders, industrialists, like just over and over and over, creating this indelible memory of all that had happened because of the original migration of elk and deer and other wildlife. And then I was flying into Tucson this morning was so amazing. Because I look at these, like, and the paths of where there used to be more water. And you can see like the long-term effects of like the directional, the tendrils of the foliage following these really old ravines and rivulets coming from the mountains. And who knows, like, this area didn't become a metropolis like Manhattan, but Manhattan had this other. The reason I kind of include that, and one of the things that I wanted to do even with the whole project was just sort of make space for uncertainty, or make space for a lack of knowing, or to be able to kind of look at a situation and think, how did that get that way? Or why is that way? You know, I mean, one of the things like I feel like we've thinking about the network and the web that I wanted to take with Near Nature, with Worth Your Salt, with that project. I was really thinking about how we've thrown our trust up into this network, the internet, and it's a deeply flawed and problematic situation that I feel like it's an evolutionary glitch that we're adapting to badly. And if we can pull back from that and recognize that it's a tool, but we have to use it as a tool and not be used by it. I really love that very simple expression of if the product is free, you're the product. It's just like a little tiny thing that you're like, and it comes in handy, you're like, oh wait, let me question that. Why is that free? Or what is the cloud? I think a lot about like the cloud. Oh, it's up on the cloud. I'm storing things on the cloud. Beautiful piece of brand marketing, the cloud. Because it's not a cloud. It's like a big concrete building next to a river that's sucking up water to cool all of those machinery and mechanisms that we use to just store. This stuff is in the cloud maybe, right? No, it's actually on my computer. But, you know, we're trusting, we're putting our trust in the wrong places because we're so overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming at us that this is me theorizing. I mean, I'm not trying to be empirical about it, but I feel that we hunger for certainty and that we want something, we want answers, we want something that we can count on because it's so overwhelming to think about where we are now and all of the system collapses and all of the things that we see that are kind of coming apart and some very quickly. But if we can't think about like the history of something like Broadway cutting through this island, like why did that happen? And to me, it's just so fascinating. It becomes this beautiful little thing to examine and to savor and to kind of turn over in your mind. And that's what I hope that as an artist that I can make things that breathe some space in where one might have felt, I don't know, creating some space for vulnerability or openness or making uncertainty seem like fun, maybe. So now that was the whole arc of the Worth Your Salt project, and now I've included some older pieces, some recent pieces, just to kind of give my work some context if you're not familiar with it, or just to look at. This piece is called Midlife. I made this when I was living in New York, where I was between 2003 and 2014. And as a middle-aged woman, I was thinking about that sort of viability. I remember when I was in my, I think you become like geriatric pregnancies. I don't know if like when, you know, I remember having a doctor friend say to me like, oh, you're in your, I mean, I don't have kids and I never have had kids. Not that I know of. But this is called, it's made out of paper and wax and pigment. And I was thinking about those poor garlics when they're just, you know, they're sprouting on your kitchen counter and they're just the most beautiful. But that's when they become something that's useless in the kitchen. You know, like you don't cook with them anymore once they're sprouted. So it was just a kind of a funny metaphor for thinking about restoring the beauty of that, of, you know, maybe being put out to pasture at midlife. This piece is called Jam. It's a bronze forking branch with a cast paper pillow molded into the crotch of the branch. Certain sensuality there. This is a giant beaver. This is called Beaver Story. This is from 2000, and it lives in the White and Kennedy building in Portland, which was a wonderful. I want to say, is there a word like happy stance, like happenstance? Could I make up a word like happy stance? that Dan Wyden acquired this piece and moved it from Pica, where it was exhibited when I had a show there in 2000, and it moved across the building into this wonderful location in this esteemed Portland ad agency in this beautiful concrete building designed by Allied Works Architecture. And the Beaver was a piece this piece is important to me and kind of a touchstone in my work, because it was, I'd wanted to make it for a long time and spent years trying to figure out how I was going to sort of, tell a sculptural story about the 8-foot-tall prehistoric beaver. And then I found this plywood at the Rebuilding Center, and it became this, the process of making this piece was hilariously complicated, and it didn't involve any sort of technical CNC thing. It was very handmade, but it did involve getting a clay study of the beaver that I sculpted, CAT scanned in a hospital and smuggled in a blanket. But the parable of this was that the prehistoric beaver was, the beaver, our state animal in Oregon, was the original hydro engineer, land developer, logger, the only other mammal besides humans that changes environments to suit it. It doesn't go seeking out an environment, it creates an environment. Currently, the beaver is recolonizing the, what? Oh, geez, really? Oh, damn. All right, you know what? We'll just talk about the beaver later. Prehistoric horse. Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought this was gonna go too fast, so maybe I was being too languorous in my time. This is called Chopping Pillow. Do you guys have questions? You have some? I'll just click through these quietly then, how about that? This is my left hand by my right hand. Oh no, this is my right hand by my left hand. Okay. How long did you keep, okay, this is the question. How long did you keep them out in the wild? Did you want them to still be recognizable? Thank you. The salt licks, like the head was out in the wild for a full year. The others varied in degrees to slightly less. The hand was out for about 6 months. So there was a range. And like I said, I didn't know if did you want them to still be recognizable? I didn't know what would become of them. Oh, this one, let's see. What was the lifetime of the salt licks? This is a few questions. What is the relationship between the salt licks, locations, relationships? This might be a long question. Suppose an elk came up with the same project and wanted to install salt licks in urban areas where humans would interact with. They'd go to a bar, which I think they do. The elk would, something smells, the recordings would be displayed where and how. Well, it was actually, I feel like the Skyline Tavern replicated this scenario in a sense, because there was a mutual draw, and it was amazing to see. And I had guest books so people could make comments. And the Skyline Tavern, people did gather. It was essentially like the elk kind of owned the human interactions at that location for a while. I'm sorry, we're running out of time, and I hold it against no one if people have to leave.
There's just one last question.
Okay. What is the parable of the beaver? Is that the question? I can't tell. The parable of the beaver was that the beaver was the original industrialist, and the parable being that it is unsustainable. I thought about the biological imperative of the developer, like the person who is a developer. They're taking down swaths of land, they're building things. They're building. That's what they're going to do. So one of the things that I think we need to do, how do we do that better? Like, they're not going to change. They're still going to develop. They're still going to do these things. It's in their DNA. But it's not sustainable the way we're doing it. That's the parable. Like, the beaver is not 8 feet tall anymore. It's very small.
Thank
so
Yeah.
much for bringing your
Thank you.